Hi there, and welcome to the Footlight Broadcast. My name is Brian O'Kelly. I will be your host for today's adventure as we begin this brand new show. Thank you for joining. The title of today's episode is The Grounds of Knowledge. And so let's just get right into the content here. I do think that I owe you an introduction. If you haven't seen me before, don't know who I am, or aren't familiar with my prior broadcast efforts, I want to share with you a little bit about that and kind of who I am and where I come from and how I come to do this. Again, my name is Brian O'Kelly. Some of you know me from prior broadcast efforts. For some of you, I'm a brand new personality who you've never seen before. And so I think a little background is probably useful. The first thing is I'm 57 years old. I'm married with 4 children and 7 grandkids. So I'm blessed for sure. I have been a Christian most of my life. Although I did flirt with atheism when I was in college, and I found that I didn't have enough faith to believe everything was random. And so after flirting with the idea of atheism, I then started looking at other religious constructs and philosophical constructs. And as I examined them one by one, I found that they were all lacking, at least in the ability to stand up to the scrutiny I was going to put them through. And so what I've ended up with now is a place where I think that Christianity is the only theological system that will stand the scrutiny, at least that I would put it through. So, I'm mostly self-instructed in these efforts. You should know I didn't go to Bible college. I'm not university educated on these things, but I have probably listened to thousands and thousands of hours of other people's teaching and preaching and education on this topic from university professors and critics of Christianity as well as proponents of it. And I've read countless books on these topics as well. In addition to that, I decided years ago that I wanted to write my own handwritten copy of the Bible, which I recently finished. I by hand in spiral notebooks wrote down the whole Bible start to finish, and it took about 7 years total, although I didn't work at it steadily. It was an hour here, an hour there when I had time, and I think if I had done it an hour a day, it would have been maybe 3 years, something like that. So that's the approach that I come to this with, and for some of you, that's insufficient for you to think that I have anything to offer, and that's okay. No worries. You probably have a stop button on the device you're listening on, and no worries. But I hope that you'll find value here. Let's just find out. So this series that I'm going to teach is probably going to take, I suspect, a couple of years to complete, maybe more. There's a lot that I have discovered and a lot that I've organized. And I will tell you that one of the things to look out for when you find a teacher of anything like this is if they tell you that they have some secret knowledge of their own or some secret discovery that only they know, and you need to listen to them because of that. Now, I'll tell you right away that I don't have any secret knowledge. I don't have any secret discoveries. Most everything I know has been synthesized from what I've learned from other people. And so for years and years and years, I've been studying these topics, and I've done my best to marry together the information that I've received from others. And I would encourage you that everything that I say, I think you should go check out for yourself. Don't take my word for it any more than I was really willing to take someone else's word for it. So I want to share with you kind of the format of this show and how it's going to go. In some of the things I did before, I did them live and I did them on a regular, predictable schedule. And I'm not going to do that with this show, and there are a couple reasons. I learned from my prior broadcast efforts that a rigid publication schedule doesn't make for the best content when you're a solo broadcaster. It takes a lot of work to get the content together, and I want to make sure that I am complete and prepared before I do any of these episodes. So what the interval will be between them remains to be seen. As often as I'm able to gather notes and be confident that I have sufficient to do a half hour, an hour program, on a single topic, I will come to the microphone and do it. And I have no idea what that schedule will be. My mission is to make sure that I deliver excellent content to the best of my ability every time. That's another reason why I'm not going to do the shows live, because live content, I have learned again from my prior experience that it is not necessarily the best content. You say things that you wouldn't want to say, or you misspeak. And so this will give me an opportunity to go back and edit or re-record the episodes as needed. This is actually the second time through this content because of some technical errors that I discovered. And I just want to make sure that I'm presenting the best things to you that I can. So this first episode is mostly foundational to the idea of how to evaluate information, how we can know anything, and the reasons of trusting anything at all, let alone the Bible. So we'll get into the authenticity of the Bible and how it was assembled in the next episode, where it came from, who the writers were, why we should put any faith in it. We'll probably cover 2 or 3 episodes, beginning with the next one. But this really is about the foundations for the show and the foundations for those episodes that are forthcoming. So the first thing is I want to let you know that I'm taking it as an a priori fact. And a priori means beforehand, a known, a given. I'm going to take it as a priori that you believe in a God of some kind. Now, if you're an atheist, no problem. You're welcome. And you may learn something here about why Christians think what they think. I don't necessarily expect you to be persuaded by what I have to say. Perhaps you will be. Maybe you'll gain some respect for Christian ways of thinking. Regardless, you're welcome. But this show is intended for people who have some kind of a belief in some kind of a God. Okay, so that's kind of the foundation of this. And the reason for that is because well over 90% of the people in the world believe in some kind of God. They don't all believe in the same God. They don't all believe in the same characteristics of God or abilities of God or type of God, but they all believe in some kind of God. And we have to kind of believe in mass stupidity or mass confusion of some kind to accept the premise that most people believe something and it's just not true. Now, throughout history, too, most people have believed in some kind of God or gods far more often than they ever didn't. And I know that sanity is not statistical, that just because a lot of people believe something doesn't make it true. I understand that full well. Yet I do believe that in this case, if belief in God was a fool's errand that was demonstrably untrue, it would be interesting that we would probably see people, and again, this is supposition on my part, I think we would see people as they move through their lives, move further away from God and further away from a belief in God, and move toward atheism or a disbelief in God. But the exact opposite phenomenon happens. As people go on in their life, they become more conscious of the presence of God, more conscious of that there is a God, and even of, whether they're Christians or not. This is a phenomenon that we observe all over. And atheism is primarily the province of the young. It is something that most people who ever believe in it end up discarding. And so that doesn't mean that atheism isn't true and that being a theist, a God believer is true, but it is an observation that we can put into our bag of information and decide what to do with. Now, atheism, the belief that there is no God, is a relatively rare belief system still, and it's relatively new in terms of its having any prominence at all. It does have a growing number of adherents, but it is by no means anything that is statistically important. Now, atheists would say that that's because of the dominant hold on the world by the theists and the control that they exert. I actually believe that it's kind of the opposite, that the main reason atheism is growing is because there's been so little good education about reasons to put your trust in the Bible. And so I'll add one more thing in terms of the reasons for this kind of approach to this topic is, since I'm speaking English and I'm part of the English-speaking Western world, most people in that in the West, and not just in English-speaking countries, most people in the West do believe in the God of the Bible. And so whether they have any active religious faith or not, most people do believe in the God of the Bible at some level. So for purposes of this broadcast series, I won't be belaboring the point that God exists or trying to make the arguments for that position. There are sufficient people out there who actually make that argument full well, probably better than I can. And so you're welcome to just Google that and look for the people who do that and, see what you think of their arguments. So I've decided to focus on people who already believe that there is a God of some kind. Now, what people have learned over time is that Bible teachers and preachers and churches are often untrustworthy. They're often corrupt. They're often wrong. They're often abusive to people. And so people have learned from their own experience, which we'll talk about in a little bit, not to trust things of God, not to trust churchmen and church leaders. Now, I think that what I'm hoping to demonstrate through this series is that the untrustworthiness of some church leaders, the untrustworthiness of some Bible teachers, the untrustworthiness of some church organizations is not a sufficient reason to discard Christianity wholesale or to distrust the Bible. The fact that some people use these things as tools to either mislead or even hurt people is not a reason to say that the tool is no good. For example, you could take a hammer and you can build a house, or you can do a great deal of damage with it. And either way, the hammer itself is not the actor. And the same would be true with the Bible or with the Christian faith. It can be done to build and edify the life of its adherents, or it can be used as a weapon against people and to control them, which often happened in times past. And we'll talk about church history a little bit as we get into that. So the sad truth is that a lot of church leaders, a lot of Bible teachers have never thought very deeply about the things that I'm going to share with you in this broadcast. Many of them received their faith and their information about the Bible along with their last name and their family furniture. And I did too. I was raised a Christian, and I was given my faith, but at some point I had to have it become my own, right? Now, alternatively, a lot of those teachers attended a theological school, a Bible school, if you will, Bible college, with a narrow or biased focus that really didn't allow for thorough exploration of competing viewpoints, or the competing viewpoints were framed in such a way as to be inaccessible. Now, I don't know what kind of person you are in terms of your acceptance of information, whether you're generally skeptical or generally, as they might say, gullible, a person who just believes things because someone says so. But I have never been the kind of person who just believes something because someone else said so. I have never usually been satisfied to just take someone's word for things, especially things that maybe didn't add up or seemed without foundation. So on things that I could check out for myself, I generally have done so. And we will discuss things that you can't check out for yourself in a little bit. But in the case of the Bible and in the case of the Christian faith, there was a lot that I could check out and a lot that I could use to determine whether or not I should put any faith in the Bible as a document or a set of documents, or in the Christian church as a religious philosophy for life. And one of the things I really wanted to do, and especially in my effort to handwrite my copy of the Bible, is I wanted to understand all of the arguments for all of the things that I believed. And I also did my best to understand all of the counter arguments for the things that I believed. And I don't think that I'm not under any illusions that I've checked it all out or know it all, but I've satisfied myself that most of the things that I believe I understand the foundation for, especially the important things. Some things that are maybe in dispute are ultimately, in the end, unimportant in terms of their impact on your life. So I want to, just in full disclosure here, I want to admit that I'm not an unbiased teacher, that confirmation bias is a real thing, that I probably bring some confirmation bias to this discussion, that chances are that I, since approach it from the view of a believer, I may have a less skeptical eye towards some of these arguments than an atheist who doesn't want to believe this does. So let's just get that on the table and admit it. But I do think that I am working very hard not to be a biased observer of these things. I am working very hard to seriously consider the alternative viewpoints and the alternative arguments. And some of these alternative viewpoints and arguments are quite persuasive, but when broken down, in the end, they are ultimately fallacious. So, if I'm going to base my life decisions, if I'm going to instruct my family, the people I care most about, in these things, I think it's important for me to understand whether or not this information is true to the best I can. Because if I didn't think it was true, or I weren't responsible enough to check it out, it could be entirely unhelpful. It could possibly even be dangerous to me, dangerous to my family, the people I care about, and dangerous to those around me if I were to do that. So it's my intention not to be a person who says, well, I can believe the Bible because the Bible says so. That's not an argument that works for me, and it's probably not an argument that works for anyone who's at all skeptical about these things. It's my intention through this broadcast series to lay the foundation for why I have concluded that I can trust the Bible, that I can trust its contents, and that I can trust the Christian faith to be my faith of choice and not any other. So let's talk a little bit about why would knowing if we can trust the Bible be important? Why would that matter? Well, I've read a lot of books, and you've probably read a lot of books, and it doesn't take long after opening the Bible that you, in fact, like in the first line, in the beginning, right, you see that this book is making some really bold claims. Claims about the past, claims about creation, claims about God and the afterlife and the spiritual world that are, candidly, they're fantastic in nature, right? They're the stuff of fantasy and science fiction novels if they're not true. And so it would be, to me, kind of important to know if those things were true. And so let's go with the idea that there is a God, but as an a priori position. But if there is a God, and perhaps you're not a Christian and you believe in some other God or other kind of God, it'd be important to me to know, if there is a God, what kind of God is he? Is he the kind of God who is he eternal and uncreated? Or is he a created being from some other planet or solar system, and he had a finite beginning? That would matter. Does God live forever? Or will he die someday? Does he have a finite end, or will he cease to exist at some point? Is he vindictive? Does he exact punishments on people without mercy? Is he cruel, like the little boy who pulls the wings off a fly? Is that the kind of God that God is? Is he selfish? Does he act only in his own interests? Is he generous? Does God give to us and others out of his resources, or is he stingy, not helping people when he could? Is he controlling? Is God manipulative? Does he have control over the laws of nature, or is he subject to them? Those things would all be important to know if we're going to know that there is a God. What kind of God is he? So let's assume, for the sake of our discussion, that there is a God. And again, that's the position of the broadcast. Would it be important to know what he wants you to know? I personally can't think of anything more important than knowing what God wants me to know. And I know a ton of men who know all of the batting averages of their favorite baseball players, or the quarterback rating of their favorite NFL quarterbacks, or the goal percentage of shots on goal percentage of their favorite hockey or soccer players. And those things are not necessarily unimportant. But to me, it's more important than anything to know what it is that God wants me to know. I can't think of anything more important. And so what I want to know is, what does he want me to know about him? What does he want me to know about the past and the future? What does he want me to know about the world around me? What does he want me to know about human nature interactions? So these are the kind of things that you could learn from the Bible if the Bible is in fact true and reliable. Here's some more things that you could learn from the Bible if it's true and reliable. Is there an afterlife? Or are we just worm food when we die? Do I have free will to make my own choices, or is God controlling everything and I really don't have any free will? It'd be good to know if the Bible is true. Will the information be beneficial to me or to other people, or is it just a waste of time? Can it help me with anything, or will it in fact get in my way and impede my progress and growth? I'd want to know, what does God want from me? What does he want from others? And is it reasonable to expect that me or others can accomplish those things, that I or others can accomplish the things that God wants? Does it give me a standard? Does the Bible give me a standard by which I can evaluate the world around me? Who should I trust? Should I trust Bible teachers? Should I trust philosophers? Should I trust politicians? Or should I trust the Bible itself as a basis for things that I make decisions about in my life? So let's talk about a fancy word called epistemology. And epistemology is a fancy word for the grounds of knowledge, which is the title of this episode. And the grounds of knowledge is basically to say, how do we know what we know? How do I know what I think I know? So let's talk about truth briefly. Merriam-Webster has two kinds of truth that it describes. One is subjective truth, and let me just read to you the dictionary definition from Merriam-Webster. Definition 1, philosophy, relating to the way a person experiences things in his or her own mind. Subjective reality, dreaming is a subjective experience, a person's subjective perception of the world. Definition 2, based on feelings or opinions rather than based on facts. A subjective judgment or decision. Personal taste in clothing is very subjective. So let me give you an example of this. My wife really likes curry. I don't really like curry. She says curry's good. I say, no, curry's not good. Now, which one of us is right? Well, we're both right, because it's a subjective truth. This is one of those things where I can say, well, hey, I really like that outfit that you're wearing, or what a great suit, to someone. And someone else says, oh, that's the most hideous suit I've ever seen. This is subjective reality, subjective truth, and subjective truth is still true. It is true to me that I find this particular food delicious and another particular food not so delicious. And yet you may go to another person who flips those two, and it is absolutely true for them that the thing I find not so palatable, they find to be very delicious. And so that is subjective truth. Now, subjective truth is not unimportant, and it is something that we base a lot of our life on, but subjective truth is insufficient to answering the questions, can I trust the Bible, for the most part? So we have to look at the second definition of truth that Merriam-Webster offers, which is objective truth. And let me just read to you again the definition. Based on facts, definition 1, based on facts rather than feelings or opinions. The example they give is, we need someone outside of the company to give us an objective analysis. Not influenced by feelings is the second definition. The examples they give, scientists must be objective. It's hard to be objective about my own family. I agree with that. It's hard to be objective about my own faith. That's why I cover the idea I may be influenced by confirmation bias here. You'll be the determiner of that as you listen and watch. The third definition they give is under philosophy. It says existing outside of the mind, existing in the real world. In other words, objective reality. So there's let me give you some examples. I may say that such and such a person is tall, and you may think that they're not very tall. That would be the subjective part of it. But we could measure that they are 6'2", and that would be the objective reality in that case. So we have subjective truth and objective truth, and we use both of them in terms of helping us decide what to believe in our life. And so we're going to talk about these things as we go through this series. So let's talk about experience. We have two kinds of experience that we learn from, that we gain knowledge from. course, the first experience is our own experience, right? A lot of what we know is based on our own experience. Now, a lot of what we know is based on the experience of others, but a lot of it's based on our own experience. I've observed that if I put certain things on my plants, that they grow, and if I put other things on them, they don't grow. If I keep the plants well watered, they look perky, and if I don't keep the plants well watered, they look, wilted. And so, that's just based on my own experience. Now, I could also gain that information from someone else who has plants if I didn't, right? And then I'd be operating on their knowledge. But most of what we've learned in school, most of what we've learned throughout our life is based on the experience of other people, not based on our own experience. So let me give you some examples. Let's talk about this. The experience of others is an unbelievably valuable teaching tool for us and learning tool. And it comes through the testimony of other people. So let me give you some examples. I've never been to Australia, but I believe that there is an Australia. I've never been to England, but I believe that there is an England. And I believe it for a couple reasons. One, I've seen photos and videos of those places. Number two, I've talked to people who've been to both, and I don't believe them to be dishonest people. And, I know that they got in an airplane and went there for a certain amount of time. My own son went to Australia and, talked to him about his experience there. And so every time I look at any kind of a map, I'm going on the experience of other people for the most part. Now, some parts of the map I've driven or been to myself, but realistically, that's a very limited amount of the world that I've ever seen. And probably even if you're well-traveled, it's a very limited amount. If you've been to France and Germany and England and Lithuania, you probably haven't been to the whole of those countries. And so you have a limited view even of the places that you've been, even if you're extremely well-traveled. And so we rely on the testimony of other people. In biographical information, in terms of, historical figures or even contemporary figures, unless we knew them, we're relying on the testimony of other people. When I read a biography of Abraham Lincoln or another one of Theodore Roosevelt, those I was relying entirely on people who either knew them or knew a great deal about them. And unless they're dishonest people, the testimony that they offer is reliable. Now, it may not be perfect, but it's reliable and it's probably true. It's probably incomplete. Same with like Julius Caesar or Constantine or King Tut. We know that these people existed not through our own experience, but through the experience of other people or through historical information that we found, right? And so the same with history. We have the ancient Greeks, we have the rise and fall of the Roman Empire, the Civil War in the United States, the Revolutionary War separating the United States from England, the French Revolution, the fall of the Russian czars to Lenin and the Bolshevik Revolution. I mean, these are things that most of us didn't experience. Most of us are too young to have been around for World War II, but we still believe that there was a World War II. And we believe that because of the testimony of other people. Now, does that mean that all of the testimony we've received about all those things was perfect? No, but it's sufficiently true and sufficiently accurate that we can get a pretty good idea that these things did happen and that they happened in substantially the way that they've been described to us. So science is another way that we can know things, but this is really important. Science is not a way that we can know anything historically. There's no science experiment. The scientific method requires a repeatable experimentation after a theory is developed, right? So if I have a theory that Abraham Lincoln lived and was president of the United States, there's no experiment I can conduct to determine that, and I can't repeat the experiment. The same with, any of the other historical figures or historical events. There's no science experiment that can be done to determine that. Okay, there's no science experiment that can be done to determine whether or not you love your wife or your husband or your children or your mom and dad. None of that is determinable by the scientific method. I had a friend once tell me that science was the only way to prove anything. And I said, really? Can you tell me about the science experiment that you did to determine that? And of course he couldn't. And so his statement that science is the only way to determine anything is a fallacious statement on its face. But let's talk about science for a minute in things like chemistry or gravity or physics. These are scientific disciplines where there can be experimentation and the experimentation can be repeated. But I just take it on faith that H2O is the construction of water. I've never been under an electron microscope to see the atoms or to see the molecules and how they are formed or break apart. I've seen all the models in the textbooks, and I believe that it's true based on the testimony of other people. But I know the only thing I know about water and the way it's constructed is from the testimony of other people. And the same is true for a lot of other scientific disciplines, right? Like terminal velocity in physics, or I've never done any surgery on a human being. I've never dissected a cadaver. But I take it as accurate testimony when I look at anatomy diagrams. I don't believe that the people who put those together are all entirely dishonest. And so while I don't have my own experience there, I do have the experience of others that I rely on, and it's testimonial experience. Okay. And so what we're going to talk about when we get into the Bible is we have the Old Testament, which is testimony of others, and we have the New Testament, which is testimony of others. So most of the information we have about anything, not just about Christianity or the Bible, is based on the testimony of others, not on our own experiences or our own observations. And basically, we are trustworthy of that information all the time, and we put our faith and in the experience and competency of other people literally every day. Have you ever eaten in a restaurant or gotten coffee at a drive-through coffee stand? If you have, you are trusting in the competency of the people who are preparing your food. Have you ever flown in an airplane? Did you check out the pilot's credentials? Hey, how many hours do you have in this aircraft, and what's your level of experience? And you're trusting in the pilot. You're trusting in the people who hired him and who supervise him or her and evaluate that pilot. And man or woman doesn't matter, but you're trusting in the people who hired and evaluate and keep that person in their job, right? If you have a driver's license or you've ever taken a ride in an automobile, you are putting faith in the competency of the other drivers. And not only of the other drivers, but of the automobile manufacturer, of their mechanic, of their brake shop, of the tire manufacturer. We're putting our faith in the competency of others without even thinking about it. We do this every day, all the time. And so if you are skeptical of the Bible or the contents of it in a way that is completely different from the way you put faith in the competency or testimony of others, I'll suggest that your own bias and your own confirmation bias may be showing if you approach the Bible with a degree of skepticism that you don't approach, for example, the writings of Thucydides about the Persians and the Medes and the history of their interactions with the Greeks. There's not any real reason to put any skepticism into that any more than there is to put it into the testimony of the Bible. So I'll ask you, for the purposes of this broadcast, or these broadcasts, if you pursue them, to go ahead and set your own skepticisms and biases aside. Now, I don't expect you to accept what I'm saying prima facie, but I will ask you not to bring an unwarranted skepticism to the topics at hand. Okay, so that's kind of the episode for today. That's the foundation of what I wanted to share with you today. The next episode will be on the origin and assembly of the books of the Bible. Where did the Bible come from? Was it entirely a political document assembled in the 3rd and 4th centuries by people to exert control over people? Are there books of the Bible that were intentionally left out because they didn't match the narrative? How and why was this book constructed? Where does it come from? And why should we put any faith in it? So that's the idea here in the Footlight broadcast, is to bring you the answers to some of these questions as best I can. I'll also, on the next episode, address any questions not any, because there may be a lot, but some of the questions that you send me in messages and so on. I'll also take a look at and try and answer a few of those at the end of every broadcast. So if you have questions about the Bible or the Christian faith, please feel free to do so, and I'll do my best to answer those as much as there's opportunity. Thanks again. Again, my name is Brian O'Kelly. This is the Footlight Broadcast. I'll see you soon.